The ACC-SEC Challenge matchups are out, and all we care about is this about to be another bloodbath?
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey there, what's up? Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, the only daily national college hoop show out there. Happy Thursday, welcome in. I'm your host, Isaac Schade, and you're joining me at the place to get your college basketball content every single day. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks so much for making us your first listen or watch to get your Thursday going the right way. Want to remind you, you can catch every single episode ad-free on Amazon Music. Special shout out to all the everydayers with us and all the great members of the Locked On College Basketball Discord. This episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Joining me today on the show is my good buddy JJ Jackson, the host of Locked On Blue Devils. Perfect time to join as we got the matchups on Wednesday. John Rothstein reporting the matchups for the ACC-SEC Challenge, the third annual of these, with a split in the first year at 7-7, and then an absolute drubbing. I think that's a good word, JJ, 14-2 in favor of the SEC last year. So here's where JJ and I are going to go. We're going to look back at that and just talk about that big storyline. Does the ACC have to get back in the game on this thing to get the benefit of the doubt? We'll talk some storylines that we're seeing from it. We'll talk the actual matchups, make some predictions, let JJ look at the Duke matchup between Duke and Florida, a near national championship game matchup, were it not for a heroic Houston effort there in the national semifinals. JJ, great. Love when we get a news drop in the middle of the summer like this. Big thanks. This is a question that I want to start with. Does the ACC have to perform better this time around in order to start getting the benefit of the doubt, both from an eye test and analytics standpoint?
100%, Isaac. I mean, I don't think that's even a question. And I know that this is something that you and I follow so closely with our ties to these ACC schools.
That's right.
Look at what they did last year. I mean, to say those numbers again and again and again, 14-2 was the beatdown that the SEC handed the ACC. And so much of what's happened in recent weeks is a direct reflection of that. I think in so many ways, you could go back to the NCAA tournament with the selection committee putting schools in certain spots because of the ACC shortcomings in non-conference games like that. But very recently, the ACC making the decision to reduce the number of conference games that they were going to have, right, so that they could have a greater opportunity of putting more premier non-conference games on these school schedules. So when you start with these ACC and SEC challenge games, you've got to step up to the plate and be able to deliver some wins.
Man, yeah, absolutely. And to your point, the only two wins last year were the two teams right there at the top of the ACC, your Duke Blue Devils beating Auburn. They're at home in Cameron, and then Clemson beating at then number 4 Kentucky in Littlejohn there at Clemson. And I just still reel, JJ, when I look at that, and I'm like, how did literally nobody else just dumb luck their way into at least one other victory in this thing? And look, JJ, we do have to acknowledge that matchups make all the difference in the world, right? Like, if depending on how it lines up and, on paper, who knows what it's going to be, because transfer portal era and different teams come together in different ways. But still, at some level, both conferences are going to be judged by their result in a line your teams up, line our guys up. Let's go at this Revolutionary War style. And that's just how teams are going to be judged, right?
Yeah, because, I mean, we just did the ACC angle and perspective in this. I think you can very easily flip the case and talk about an SEC conference that goes 14-2 in this challenge alone against the ACC on their way to putting in a record 14 teams into the NCAA tournament, because they had so many big wins against non-conference competition, and that they were able to go head-to-head so well against themselves within the conference itself. So I think it's just as easy to look at the SEC angle in this as well, because another chance for them to make a statement. We know how loaded the conference has been in recent years. When you can make a statement with your conference by being so dominant over the other conferences, I think that says a whole lot. Go to the Final Four. 2 teams from the SEC are playing there in the Final Four.
Yeah, and in the Elite Eight, you've got your national champion, South Carolina, LSU, the only 2 SEC teams in the newly formed 16-team SEC to not make the tournament last year. And JJ, to your great point, it wasn't even just in this challenge last year. I wish I remember the number off the top of my head, but the SEC's winning percentage in totality in non-con play was
Nobody beat them.
Yeah, they won at a historic level in non-conference play. And it wasn't like they were just going out and playing cupcake games. Like the SEC challenges themselves, right? Like some teams had weaker non-conference schedules, but they put themselves in a position like it was a deserved 14 teams in the NCAA tournament, I guess is how I would ultimately put it.
I mean, go to the bubble. You were following that so closely here with just college basketball as a whole,
Right.
but then also from the North Carolina perspective.
Right.
Texas gets into, I mean, right there on the bubble this past season, and you're going to get the benefit of the doubt because you play in the SEC, and then also you were able to do so well in those big non-conference games. You won your game in the SEC-ACC Challenge a year ago.
And that's the difference between the 2 conferences, where in the SEC, you had quad 1 and quad 2 games night in and night out as you went out. For the ACC, JJ, I mean, you experienced it with Duke going 19-1, just struggling to find quality wins. Like it felt like from the national narrative, it was a minor miracle that the Blue Devils were able to get a 1 seed despite being drugged down by the rest of the ACC. And I know that was a storyline you had to fight with a lot last year.
Yeah, definitely. And you can only play who's in front of you, who's on your schedule and that sort of thing. So credit to the ACC for recognizing that and making the change like we talked about and reducing the number of conference games to open up. And then also, I think, Isaac, credit to these ACC teams, because I'm not going to sit here and act like I know every single non-conference game that's already been announced and that sort of thing. But what I have seen across the conference is so many schools announcing premier home and home series that they're opening up, or going to bigger fields and playing in bigger events and tournaments and that sort of thing to get those big time non-conference games.
And also having a better offseason transfer portal wise than last year, right? Which we're also not saying that the SEC isn't doing the same. The SEC is doing it yet again, both from a non-conference scheduling standpoint and from a transfer portal standpoint. I think the point that you're making, JJ, and that I would echo is that the ACC is stepping up their game to try to match that this year.
And go a step further. I mean, hey, the coaching carousel that starts all of this definitely went the ACC's way, where in years past, either there wasn't much change at all. For a while, we did have kind of the old coaches still holding on to their jobs. Maybe it was time the game had passed them by, and you've got some schools in the ACC that finally made those changes. But then you go out and you are NC State. You get somebody like Will Wade to win kind of the coaching carousel cycle. Virginia makes an impressive hire in Ryan Odom.
That's right.
Miami swings for the fences and takes Jay Lucas off of Duke's bench. Like so many schools within the conference also made big-time hires.
Man, that's a great point, JJ. And that then hopefully translates to what we hope will be better matchups in this year's ACC-SEC Challenge, and that's what we're ultimately here talking about today. So that's where JJ and I are going to go next, is we're going to actually look at some of these matchups, look at some of the storylines that developed from it, including Duke getting a home game in this challenge for the 2nd year in a row. So we'll have those conversations here in just a second. And right after I tell you about game time, there's nothing like the NBA playoffs, specifically right now, the NBA Finals. In fact, JJ and I are literally recording this at halftime of Game 3 with the Pacers up at home. How about that? The intensity, the buzzer beaters, the TJ McConnell of it all, the fans losing their minds. It's the kind of atmosphere you have to experience live. And boy, are this year's matchups delivering in a big way. And so if you want in, Game Time makes it fast and easy to get seats, even for these biggest playoff games. prices on the app. In fact, they actually go down the closer you get to tip off. So with killer last minute deals, panoramic seat views, and no surprise fees, Game Time is a total game changer. And with the Game Time guarantee, you know you're going to get the best deal. Because if you find a better price in the same row and section, they're going to credit you 110% of the difference. JJ, it's a little bit of a price hike from game 3 up to game 4 because it's a Friday now. 8:30 Friday night at Gainbridge. Weekend pricing, $831 to get in the door for game 4 here. But hey, those prices might go down the closer we get to Friday night. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Terms apply. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. Isaac Schade and JJ Jackson coming at you on today's episode of Locked On College Basketball. We're talking about the ACC-SEC Challenge. Again, John Rothstein from CBS Sports announced the matchups on Wednesday afternoon. So, JJ, man, we've got, as always, several appealing matchups here. I'm actually going to start by saying, as a reminder, the SEC now has 16 teams, the ACC 18. So the two ACC teams that are going to be left out this year are the no-Cal teams, Cal and Stanford. Unfortunately for the Cardinal, singular, this is the second year in a row that they are left out. Last year it was they and SMU that were the unfortunate missers, outers. So I guess if we're establishing a pattern next year, it'll be Cal and SMU, JJ.
Yeah, I mean, I was talking with some friends a little bit earlier, Isaac. Are you that upset if you're Cal and Stanford from a simple travel perspective, right? Yes. Like, you're telling me, one more time, I'm not having to go all the way across the country, because unlike the Atlantic Coast Conference, the SEC, the Southeastern Conference, does do a fair job of following their naming in terms of the geography that the conference is named after. So, credit to Cal and Stanford for not having to make trips to the Southeast for this.
I'm looking back at last year where Cal played. I can't remember if they were at home or on the road. No, yeah, they had to go to Columbia to play Mizzou. And this year, what is it? Oh, I guess it would be SMU, so it's not as far. And they have to go to Nashville. That's not too far of a travel to go play. Yeah. Not too bad to go play Vandy there. But yeah, JJ, I guess if they get to get a home game out of this, they'd be elated. But yeah, I would rather sit out than have to, as Mick Cronin put it, go see the Statue of Liberty for an 8 millionth time or whatever it was. All right, JJ, let me rattle off these matchups, and then I'd love to hear from you what, outside of the Duke game, because we'll get to that in a little bit, your area of expertise there, what really tickles your fancy here. So in Rothstein's order here, we have North Carolina at Kentucky in Rupp. They won't play in the CBS Sports Classic this year, so that's why we're able to get that matchup. Virginia at Texas. Just talked about Ryan Odom. Both those teams going to have new coaches, by the way. NC State at Auburn. They're in your neck of the woods. Clemson at Alabama. Louisville at Arkansas. Oklahoma at Wake. SMU at Vandy, as we just said. A&M at Pitt. Mississippi State at Georgia Tech. Miami at Ole Miss. LSU at BC. Virginia Tech at South Carolina. Tennessee at Syracuse. Mizzou at Notre Dame. And the Dogs, UGA at Florida State. JJ, what I know there's several matchups for various reasons that stick out, but what really jumps off the page for you?
Let me start with the guy that I've already given a shout out to already, and I'll start with Will Wade, taking NC State back down into SEC country. He spent several years there as LSU's head coach and had a lot of just really exciting and down to the wire matchups with Bruce Pearl and Auburn. And now they get the chance to run it back. NC State makes the run to the Final Four in 2023. 2024. Auburn was just in this 2025 Final Four that we saw. So two schools that are really loving their basketball right now. And dude, what Will Wade did in the portal, putting this team together.
Yep.
And then the same token for Auburn, Isaac. I mean, it's just Tahat Pettiford coming back. Everybody else is going to be a new piece down on the Plains. So two teams that have had a lot of success recently, but brand new rosters.
Yeah, man, that is a very intriguing thing. Along with that, I mentioned as I was going through them there, Virginia at Texas. We've got two brand new coaches, but two great coaches in Ryan Odom and Sean Miller. That should be an intriguing matchup there in Austin, Texas. Curious to see what happens with it. Another one that kind of stands out to me is Miami at Ole Miss. And JJ, the reason I say that is because Miami, obviously, some intrigue for you there in with the Blue Devils. But I think Miami proved from what they were last year, and Ole Miss, obviously with Chris Beard at the helm, has been moving forward. And so I think that should be a really intriguing matchup there in Mississippi.
Yeah, especially when you get those big personalities on the sidelines.
True,
we know Chris Beard certainly fits that path. I'm really going to be so intrigued this season to see what kind of in-game personality you get out of Jay Lucas, right? Like, I could speak to the competitor and kind of what it looked like as the assistant coach, but you're kind of always seated and you don't get to see as much. What is his kind of in-game personality going to look like with the Miami team that also got after it quickly in the transfer portal, bringing some guys in that are ready to compete?
Louisville, Arkansas intrigues me. JJ, I think Louisville is going to, I mean, Pat Kelsey, what a bang up job he did in year one there for the Cardinals. But coming to Arkansas, obviously Coach Cal's going to have another strong team. I think both of these schools should be at or near the top of their respective conferences this year. I think that could be one of the premier games. Obviously, we don't know who's going to be playing on which days yet. We don't know that. We expect the games themselves to be oh gosh, I'm imagining, JJ, we don't have it yet, but if history holds, it'll be Tuesday and Wednesday, December 2nd and 3rd is my expectation here. But we don't know yet, but I think that Louisville at Arkansas game should be a premier time slot.
No, absolutely. And that's going to be a game that I'm certainly going to want to watch with what Louisville was able to do a year ago. And then to your point, what Coach Cal did late in the season for Arkansas, right? There were so many expectations when you go and take that job. Then you start over an SEC play before you finally right the ship and you're able to get into the NCAA tournament and put together a Sweet 16 run. What's the outlook for Arkansas in your eyes going into next year?
That's a great question. They get back DJ Wagner, right?
That's big.
That's massive. And you get a couple bigs in. Malik Ewan, who comes over from Florida State, had some really nice moments down there in Tallahassee last year. Nick Pringle at his 8 millionth stop in the SEC. JJ, he's been at Alabama. He's been at South Carolina. Now he moves to Arkansas. Obviously, you lose Big Z off to join his brother in Illinois. So that's a hit to the backcourt there. But, obviously he's always bringing in a good recruiting class is just something that is always going to be true for John Calipari. And it's always about how quickly they come together, I guess is what I would say about it that we're watching. But
because his teams are always under a microscope, right?
That's right.
Yes. So, and it's going to be a lot of the freshmen again that need to step up. Louisville, you wouldn't expect them necessarily to be under the microscope with what Pat Kelsey was inheriting with where Kenny Payne had the program. But now that you put together a top 3 finish in your conference in your first year and you get some guys back, you do another impressive job in the portal as well. You've got to step up to the plate. Let me give you one.
Go ahead.
I'm looking at this and I'm used to seeing this in the college football national championship game. Right? I'm used to seeing Nick Saban and Dabo Swinney on sidelines with Alabama and Clemson. And now you're telling me, Isaac, that we get Alabama and Clemson on the hardwood.
Yes.
And 2 programs that, look, Nate Oates doing a heck of a job as Alabama's head coach, always has that team fired up and ready to go. And the same is said there with Brad Brownell and what Clemson does.
Well, let's keep that football idea going because it's a less sexy basketball matchup, but Georgia at Florida State. I know the Noles weren't great on the football field last year, but man, that's 2 high level football matchups we get there with both of those. JJ, I also want to mention, but we'll move on in a second. Maybe we just take the Florida, Duke, Carolina, Kentucky games into segment 3 with us here. But something you mentioned on Twitter was noticing that Tennessee and Syracuse played last year in this event, and they're playing again this year. JJ, I don't know that I love the schedulers doing it that way. What do you make of that, having them play back-to-back years?
See, I actually, I think I see both ways. I wish we could have the best of. I just wish we could have more of these matchups, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, that's fair.
Because I think so fairly, so many of these schools would love if they had a loss on the road. They would love for their team, their student sections, their fan base to get to run it back, right? Come back to our place and see if you can stand up to the test. But I also totally understand the argument for let's get new matchups each and every year. Let's keep this thing as fresh as possible, because if not, it kind of loses its luster if it switches up. But just to have one rematch, I am surprised by that, Isaac. Like I would have thought that number would be closer to 4 or 5, maybe rematches, and then start to divvy up some different matchups.
Yeah, and that's a great point. Last year we had the game that was there in Knoxville, Tennessee, number 3 at the time, wiped the floor with Syracuse 96-70. And so maybe the Orange can get a measure of revenge back up there in the now no longer Carrier Dome. I can't even think of what it's called. JMA Wireless.
JMA, yeah.
And so that'll be, that's a great point. Is it's almost like they scheduled a home and home. It's just somebody else did it for them, so they didn't have to do it. So, man, that's crazy. All right, JJ, we need to wrap this thing, get into segment 3, and we got to look at some blue bloodery type action. The reigning national champions coming to Durham to take on Duke again. As we said earlier, could have been a national championship matchup. And then we have North Carolina going to Rupp Arena for the first time in over a decade, JJ. That doesn't feel right, but we've had a lot of neutral site matchups between those two schools. We'll unpack those kind of headlining matchups coming up here in just a second. JJ, let's start in Durham, where the Blue Devils are going to welcome the reigning national champion Gators to Cameron. For Duke, getting to be at home back-to-back years after hosting Auburn last year in this event. JJ, first, what do you make of the Blue Devils getting a second straight home game when you think you would probably be ping-ponging back and forth between home and road?
That's exactly what I expected, was to be kind of ping-ponging back and forth. You wisely reminded me that the Tar Heels did get a chance to be both home and away, because when you kind of look at the layout of everything, looking at this upcoming season and the year that just concluded, with all the teams in the mix, Duke is the only team that has the same home away designation as they had a year prior. I hope that made sense.
Yes.
Where no team is away consecutive years, no team is home consecutive years outside of Duke. So the fact that they were able to get this is phenomenal. They've got a big non-conference game to sell to their home fans, because Duke's non-conference schedule right now is absolutely loaded. But so many of them are either away from Cameron Indoor on the road or at a neutral site and not inside Cameron Indoor. And there was such a great environment for the Auburn game last season.
Man.
Another team that was in the Final Four there with Duke could have seen a rematch in the national title game had they knocked off Florida. Now you get the champs. Now you get Florida coming to Cameron Indoor. And I cannot be more excited about this game going into the season.
Yeah, the O-Dome would have been rocking had it been down in Gainesville. But, man, Cameron is going to be on fire for that thing. Would love to maybe see Dickie V on the call or something like that. That'd be a lot of fun. Great news getting him back.
With the schools that we're talking about here, Duke and Florida going head-to-head, and then Auburn being the team that Duke played last season in the Challenge. These three teams making the Final Four a year ago. John Shire, Todd Golden at Florida, Bruce Pearl, 3 very prominent Jewish head coaches.
Interesting.
Have been in the same circles for so much. Bruce Pearl has stories of coaching these guys at various international competition and that sort of thing. So there's a long-standing kind of relationship between so many of these coaches, not only just in the recruiting trail, but out beyond as well. So the fact that they'll get to go head-to-head, I think is certainly special. Okay,
JJ, let's look at this matchup specifically for just a second, because Florida has literally got its entire front court back. I mean, it's insane that happened. You've got Micah Hanlockton, you've got Ruben Chinyelu, you've got Tommy Houck, and you've got Alex Condon. All, like, literally the entire front court is back for the Gators. Obviously, they get in 2 high transfers in the backcourt there. And so, dude, I just... like, that's the Florida side of it. As you look at the Duke side of it and how this matches up, what do you make of it initially?
Yeah, certainly star power on both sides because you've got the national champions and the Gators. And then for Duke, you've got a team that's going to welcome in the #1 recruiting class once again, headlined by Cameron Boozer, who's going to be right there in the front court. And then we're Duke, a team that did not have a single scholarship player enter the transfer portal, 5 guys coming back off of last year's team. And 2 of those guys in particular are big front court pieces. And Pat Gongba and Malik Brown with what they're set to do for the Blue Devils this season. So I think that you look at that, it's almost, I think it evens out a little bit in the front court with Cam Boozer, Gongba, and Brown, and then all the bigs that Florida has on their sides. And then maybe this does turn into more of a kind of guard-heavy basketball game where you're asking Xavier Lee and Boogie Flan for Florida to step up to the test against the likes of Caleb Foster, Caden Boozer, and Sarr that Duke's going to have this upcoming year.
Yeah, it's so interesting that we just talked about Arkansas, and while they get some nice pieces, they lose a massive one in Boogie Fland, and Todd Golden is saying thank you very much.
Yes.
And I'm very intrigued by these 2 guys. I love Xavier Lee coming out of Princeton there, and I think he will have no trouble kind of transferring up to the SEC level, to the high major level. But really intrigued to see how those guys fit, especially coming off of how good Florida's backcourt was last year. Can they live up to the hype that was Walter Clayton and the athleticism of Elijah Martin and all that? They got a tall task ahead of them, quite literally.
I will never try to speak for John Shire, but I feel pretty safe in saying, he's glad Walter Clayton's not going to be playing in this matchup, considering how well he ended the season there with Florida, leading them to the title. Hey, you were talking blue bloods here, Isaac, and you're talking North Carolina and Kentucky getting a chance to go head to head. And this matchup is possible because they're not meeting there in the CBS Sports Classic. I was a little hopeful that maybe Duke would get a matchup in Rupp because the Blue Devils haven't played there since 1980.
Has it been that long?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. And Duke's in the same position where if it's a Champions Classic.
Yeah.
Year,
What's Duke's Champions Classic matchup? Or Kansas or Michigan State?
Kansas.
Okay.
Yep. And then they'll play Michigan State in a true road game. Then no Kentucky on the schedule.
Yeah. That would have made a ton. And especially because I was kind of thinking they would send North Carolina had been, as you mentioned earlier, had been at home for the first 2 years of ACC-SEC Challenge, hosting the Tennessee team with, his name's completely just left my head right now. Dalton Connect, that team. And then last year hosted Alabama. And so obviously they were going to be on the road, but I was anticipating it would be to Florida or Auburn that they would go. And that would pave the way for a Duke-Kentucky matchup, which Kentucky, good grief. Mark Pope has done it again. Another great offseason, bringing in a whole bunch of talent. And this year, he also brought in a lot of good freshman talent. You think about Jasper Johnson, you think about several other guys coming into Big Blue Nation there. And it's going to be a tough test for this North Carolina team against a Kentucky team that I think will they will be more highly rated in the preseason.
And you mentioned, just that it hasn't been as long, right? We're not going back to 1980.
That's correct.
For the last time that Duke played at Rupp, but it's still been over a decade for North Carolina, and yet they still have had so many meetings in the interim between there.
Yep. So JJ, the last time, because the teams had a home and home that they played before the CBS Sports Classic started. So the last time they were at Rupp was December 13th of 2014, but they've played 6 times since on neutral sites, 5 of those in the CBS Sports Classic, where Duke is 4-1, Kentucky 4-1 in those games. And then the outlier that was not CBS Sports Classic was the Luke May Elite 8 game back in 2017.
What a game. Yeah.
Good grief. That was a crazy Elite 8 game there in FedEx Forum in Memphis. And so really, really good stuff. JJ, ultimately, as you look at this, how do you see this playing out? Is it more like the first year of the matchup where it was a 7-7 tie, a bloodbath for the SEC? Again, how do you see it playing out ultimately?
I think you got to lean closer towards the 7-7 tie. I'm not comfortable yet in flipping this fully back in the ACC's favor, which pains me. I mean, absolutely pains me to say that, Isaac. But I do think the ACC will be much more competitive in this one.
Yeah, I agree with that on all accounts. I don't think it flips to the ACC's favor, but I think it will be closer to the middle. Of course, as we have to acknowledge in the portal era, we're just looking at a bunch of names on paper and doing our very best to think about how they'll come together and how they'll match up with the other team that we're looking at on paper. And so it's just a lot of fun to speculate, and ultimately we'll see what happens.
At the end of the day, we're, here in June reacting to this news, trying to figure out who's going to win the series and the matchups here. And these teams, Isaac, are working out trying to learn everybody's name on their team. Like, what's my teammate's name? Because so many of these rosters are entirely different.
How do we get all of Dame Sarr's paperwork done? How do we get Luka Bogovats's paperwork done, right? Like, can these guys even get to America? That man, so many storylines. Going to be a lot of fun to track, JJ, as we go throughout the rest of the summer. But for now, we got to get to the second half of Game 3 of the NBA Finals, see if the Pacers are still in the lead. I haven't been tracking it as we've been recording.
Yeah.
So it'll be a nice surprise when we get back to it. You guys, please make sure you go check out Locked On Blue Devils, where JJ does a great job every day. Check out Locked On SEC with the great Chris Gordy, Locked On ACC with our guy Alex Dono and Kenton Gibbs. Man, all those guys do a phenomenal job with their shows. If you've not subscribed to Locked On College Basketball on video and audio, make sure you do that. If you've not joined the Locked On College Basketball Discord, that link is in the show notes. Free to join. We'd love to see you there. As always, I want to say apologies to the Lawyer family. Let's go Wild Popes. Shouts to the McBruins, and until tomorrow, peace.